Okay, this is for AP Euro, Mr. Southall. This is for the weekend of December 1st and 2nd. We are in the Revolution, Unit 7 unit at this point. So we left off with the equality being different for gender, race, and economics. We were saying that economically, one of the things that pretty much everybody universally agreed on in Europe and America and everywhere else is that there was no guarantee of equality within the new governments. So, like we said, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence changed life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness life, liberty, and property to the pursuit of happiness. That way there'd be no obligation to provide equality in terms of, economics for rich and poor. So people were totally okay with accepting rich and poor people in these societies. The idea was that every free white male essentially should have the legal chance at economic gain, but it was not mandatory. Okay, so we're going to look at the influence next of Locke and Montesquieu. These two guys down here again, so Locke, Montesquieu. These were the most important thinkers who had impact on the liberals in this time period. Locke believed the English tradition of politics rested on the rights of Englishmen. So Locke believed that the English tradition of politics rested on the rights of Englishmen and on representative government through Parliament. If a government violates the natural rights of life, liberty, and property, it then becomes a tyranny, which is what the Americans basically are going to do here shortly. If a government violates the natural rights of life, liberty, and property, it becomes a tyranny. Montesquieu was also inspired by English constitutional history too. So both guys, even though Montesquieu's French, they both really like how English history operated, how their traditions of politics are, how Parliament's set up. They're both also inspired by the Glorious Revolution, where the Glorious Revolution transferred sovereignty more into Parliament over the king. Montesquieu also believed in groups like the judiciary nobility, which he was a member of, basically like people who had a say over the law in these European societies, like in France. This will become important later when we get to the French Revolution. But he believed in groups like the judiciary nobility. He believed that they might offer the best defense of liberty against despotism, which we talked about despotism being these tyrants or incompetent monarchs. The belief that representative government could defend liberty and interests appealed to the educated middle class. So whether it be America, whether it be in Europe, the belief of representative government could defend liberty and interest appealed to the educated middle class people. Yet the nobility was influenced by the Enlightenment, like Montesquieu, and they didn't necessarily believe that representative government meant democracy. And that's kind of how Parliament is in England, where they have representative government, where it's people of England. However, they're not really voted in like they are now, nor do they have to be directly elected like in some kind of popular election like we have now either. So just because they believe in republicanism or representative government does not mean they believe in like pure democracy or having every class of person having a say. A lot of people thought it might lead to mob rule, which is the same thing happens in America. America does not allow for pure democracy really for voting for president or most members of Congress either. Instead, they thought that voting representatives should hold property. So basically, they wanted stakeholders to have a say. They wanted you to hold property for you to be able to have a say in government, which obviously is what America does, what a lot of these other guys are going to do too. All right, lastly, in the slide, we have the conflicts over reform. Revolutions began with aspirations for equality and liberty among the social elite. So the revolutions begin among aspirations for equality among liberty and equality among the social elite. So like in America, the guys who lead the revolution, like Washington, Hancock, Jefferson, John Adams, all these guys are rich. They're all wealthy and are well-to-do. And so what happens, especially in France, because this is not so much America at the time, but France especially, there's going to be a lot of groups who feel left out. That basically the elites kind of dictate the terms of the new government, and a lot of the lower classes feel like they're left out, which might lead to even further revolution. Some dissenting voices emerge as some revolutionaries became frustrated with the limitations of liberal notions of equality and liberty. Basically, they preach all these ideas about liberty and equality, but don't really want to extend it beyond the elites themselves or people who are well-to-do, like a bourgeoisie type. And they want to fully realize those concepts. Depending upon the location, demands could include things like universal male suffrage, which does not happen in America for some time, political rights for women and free people of free color, the emancipation of slaves, and government regulation to reduce economic inequality. That's still an ongoing issue right now. How much role does the government actually have in creating economic equality, not just political equality? But that's an issue that's going to come up more probably in the 1800s, of the ideas of like the government should be responsible for people's economic inequality too, not just for their political equality. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the background. Now we're switching over to the 7 Years' War. So pretty much for France, Haiti, and America, the 7 Years' War is kind of the catalyst event that sparks the other revolutions. In a lot of ways, like the American Revolution also helped spark the French Revolution, and the same thing with the Haiti Revolution and so forth. But let's talk about the 7 Years' War first. One of the most important events that occurred globally and led to the radical thought and action was the 7 Years' War. So let's talk about the origins first. Battlefields for this conflict stretch from Central Europe to India and to North America. And you can see, I know that you can't really see the map well, but there's these little gray areas where there's a lot of fighting took place here. Fighting took place here in Central Europe. Also fighting took place all in and around India itself as well too. In America, it was called the French and Indian War, as you probably know. It was actually longer in America than it was in Europe. It actually goes on for 9 years, but in Europe and for the other parts of the world, 7 years. The war was a war between the alliance of England and Prussia, so England and Prussia were on one side, against the alliance of France, Austrians, and Spanish. So it was England and Prussia against mainly France, Austria, and Spanish. It started over the conflicts that were left unresolved from the War of Spanish Succession in the 1740s. So basically, all those countries had fought each other back in the 40s in the War of Austrian Succession. Maria Theresa had vowed to win back her territory of Silesia and to crush Prussia, and that's what kind of sparked the 7 Years' War in Central Europe. By the end of the 7 Years' War, Maria Theresa was nearly successful, but Prussia survived along with their boundaries, so they didn't dissolve like she hoped they would. And, essentially everybody had beef with people for different reasons, but they all allied with each other to kind of help each other out, which is why this became such a big global conflict. So let's look at North America, where a lot of this is going to be mostly concerned. Tensions lingered along the French and British colonial borders. Remember, French had Louisiana, the British had the 13 colonies. And so fighting broke out in the 1750s, and actually in 54, when the English began to expand into the Ohio River Valley area near French claims. And so there was a conflict over where French and British territory actually was, and so conflict broke out in 1754. Even though the French only had about 55,000 colonists in the colonies versus 1.2 million British colonists, the French were actually much more successful early on, winning many of the major victories in the first 4 years of the war. Both sides also allied and relied upon Native Americans to help them out too. So both sides allied and relied upon Native Americans to help them out as well. The tide turned when the British diverted resources from Europe and used their sea power to destroy the French fleet and choke its international commerce. So basically the British were kind of focusing on fighting everywhere, and they decided to kind of focus away from Europe to focus more on destroying their fleet, so they couldn't resupply their people in Canada in those areas, and so the French eventually were defeated. The British laid siege to Quebec, which is the main French colony in Canada, in 1759. They laid siege to Quebec for 4 months, and they eventually defeated the French in a major battle there. So basically by 1760, Quebec falls into British hands, and the French are pretty much defeated in North America, which this leads to the Treaty of Paris in 1763. The treaty certified British victory on all colonial fronts. Canada and all French territory east of the Mississippi were now British. So Canada